So I'm Derek Mack. I'm a lead designer at Pulselive, mostly around mobile apps, and yeah, I'm from Melbourne, Australia. So originally I started a networks and computing degree, and part of that was actually a multimedia class. So we learned a lot about design, interactive things. This was back in the days of Flash and Director, so a long time ago. And it was there I sort of found myself gravitating more towards the design and creative side of things. So I dropped out of that course and then went into a Bachelor of Design in Multimedia Design. Which,
and we're talking about, like, it's just date, year?
Yeah, so I finished in 2004. So yeah, I would have started about 2002 on the multimedia degree and took a couple of years off just to learn a few more things so I could then get my head a bit more around the design process and how all that worked, because it was not a familiar thing to me at the time, but it seemed like an interesting thing to do, and where a lot of the future seemed to be going into that sort of interactive space. On the web, and this was pre sort of smartphone, so you know, it's been an interesting time because it's changed a lot since then.
Yeah, definitely. And when did you find out that design is the thing you want to do? Like, how it happened?
Almost by accident. My dad used to work as a sales rep in a printing business, and often at night he would bring home work with him, and this often involves just basic bank checks, business to business type transactions, and he would come home and lay out those checks, and he would have old Letraset stickers or sheets, and so I would get to play with those at times, and I thought this is kind of interesting. And then one day he brought home a disc that he'd got from work with a bunch of pirated software on it, including Adobe Photoshop. I think this might have been about version 3 or 4. So not CS4, not anything like version 4. And this was just after getting a new computer, so we wanted to get set up with some software, and then it sort of started from there. I started playing around, seeing some things, creating lots of really gimmicky things by today's standards, you know, talking like computer screens with all the exposed wiring and all that sort of thing to just really see what the tools could accomplish. And I thought, hey, you know, I'm spending a lot of time doing this. I wonder if this is actually a thing that you can do, because it never occurred to me that was a job at that stage. So yeah, I went from there and sort of naturally gravitated towards design after that.
So after that, when you found out, you moved to the school, and after that, what was your first job?
Yeah, so as soon as I finished university, I got approached actually by a company involved with like VoIP, so internet telephony, so it would have been a Skype rival at the time. Basically, I got lucky. I knew someone I went to university with who knew someone who said they were looking for a position and would I be interested. So I went in and, you know, went through the interview process and all that, and then I was basically just their in-house designer for 4 years. This was a company named Freshtel, so yeah, there's a lot to do with voice over IP technology back in Australia, but actually as part of that we did a deal with Tesco in the UK to sell internet phones in their stores and provide plans for all of that. So I was responsible for sort of all aspects of their design, from website design to marketing collateral to product packaging. And then eventually, as we moved towards more smartphone-based products. So starting from, I think, the Nokia N95 to the very first iPhone, even before there were apps or an app store. So we started exploring some concepts there, and I guess it was from there that I saw where mobile was going, and that was the big thing at the time. So I've been working at it ever since.
So it started to be your passion then? Mobile apps and mobile design.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the first things that we worked on was building out what we called a soft phone. So this was something you could run on a desktop, much like Skype, where you could make calls out. And then so we explored the idea of, well, what if we could do this over the iPhone? Because at the time there was no app store, there was no Skype for iPhone, and there was no way to make IP calls using an iPhone, so obviously it became very expensive. And then but as that was happening, the company was running out of money, and so that sort of was a thing that never took off. But I guess the idea of designing for mobile sort of really stuck with me, and
So basically, you really never did like web design, but you basically all the time work with the Photoshop and visuals and stuff like that. Am I right?
So at the time, because of my sort of background and degree in multimedia design, that involved a lot of. So that was predominantly Flash to start with, because that was the big thing at the time, but also sort of emerging through HTML, very early days of that. So that's something that I've always kept a close eye on as well, and I've done over the time a little bit of sort of web design and sort of front end building as well.
All right. So this was your first job, and still we are talking still about Melbourne. So it was in Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah, so everything I've done is all been out of Melbourne, which is, it's a pretty isolated place. The design community there is pretty, well, it's so far away, but the design community there is very small, but I think very talented as well. There's a lot of really good designers that have come out of Melbourne and now working at places like Apple and so forth. So yeah, I like to think, as far away as we are, like we hit pretty hard for where we are.
Great. So you mentioned, how did you start your career? When did you get to design? How did you learn your design skills? Like where did you learn it? Is it even able to learn design skills?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you can learn design. How
did you do it?
Well, I have a lot of conversations with people that will often turn to me and say, "Hey, you're not, I'm not very creative. I can't do, the things that artsy people can do." But I think that's absolutely not true. I think everyone has the ability to do creative work. It's just really about putting the time in, and because it can be a frustrating process at times, particularly because there often aren't any hard and fast rules, and not everything can be planned out step by step. So you just have to keep pushing, and I think that's probably the key to it, is that you can learn anything. You just need patience. And so I that's how I learned, just from starting out with a pirated copy of Photoshop and working from there, and just trying different things over and over, and thinking, hey, this looks cool, it's not necessarily useful, maybe it doesn't look cool to other people, but I felt like I'd accomplished something at the time, and so you just keep moving forward. And then when it comes to the actual business of design, is how to take something that maybe goes from being look cool to something that's actually useful. Well, I think you can learn a lot of these things, but I think also that whether I think taste and personal judgment make a big part in that, and whether they're things that can be learnt, I'm not so sure about. But I think that certainly I wouldn't put it past anyone to be able to learn design.
All right, nice. Okay, back to Melbourne. You mentioned that there is a pretty small community of designers. How difficult it is to find a job as a designer in Melbourne?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to ask because I float from sort of job to job. I don't think I have necessarily a huge online profile. I'm not on LinkedIn, for example. So maybe I'm a little bit hard to find, but
yeah, I didn't find it.
Yeah,
you're right.
But I just happen to have sort of built up a solid body of work, and
so I mean it's difficult in Melbourne, or it's not? I think it's like, what about like offers on the market for designer job position?
I think there's quite a few now. I think Melbourne is probably a little bit behind in terms of the industry as a whole, in terms of valuing design and how that can add to a product or service or whatever a company offers. So I think that Melbourne can be hard like that, but only now just starting to realise the value in that. Yeah.
All right. In your opinion, what do you think that are key attributes for a really good designer? Just in short.
So I think that you have to, empathy is probably the biggest one. You have to understand the needs of A, the client, and B, the user, really. And I think being able to take the user's side where possible is a big issue, and that's something that I think all designers will struggle with in doing client work, is that the client will often push for certain things that maybe they want that could affect the user experience, and so you have to then maybe push back and say that, you know, well, I think, who is this for? Is this for you, or is it for the user? If it's for the user, then we have to consider them first. So that's a big key for me, is just to understand who the product is actually for, and to build that around them.
Great. How do you improve your design skills these days? How do you keep your design skills up to date?
That's a good question, because I feel like I'm one of the older sort of UI designers getting around these days. So you always have to stay on top.
And how you do that?
The group, you just have to keep working, and I you know, the best way to learn is by doing, and so I find that if I'm not working on a client project, then you really have to be doing something, whether it's your own personal work, just keeping up with the latest technology, you know, where things are going. I don't think I'm a particularly great designer when it comes to inventing things from scratch. I like to work within what works now, and I think sort of moving on that, refining and just, there's always something to be learned from just doing and making small changes, small improvements, seeing what works and what doesn't, and sort of feeling your way through a little bit.
And where do you find the inspiration, or who's your like design guru, let's say?
Well, for mobile design, it's hard because I think it's still a fairly new industry, and the rules are still being written for a lot of this. So it's hard to sort of single out anyone in that industry. But certainly outside of sort of mobile design, there's a lot of you know, a lot of places to take inspiration from. Like I take great interest in what a lot of motion designers are doing these days, because I think that's an important stage into where mobile is going, particularly working in the sort of sports industry where you know, everything is high impact, and you know, I think that motion graphics certainly add you know, an impact that that you know, without sacrificing user experience, hopefully, but you know, and can obviously help users.
So we are back to the Flash age where everything was moving.
Yeah,
I like that age, by the way. It was something new into the web page where you could add something moving and motion.
I think so, and that's kind of where it feels like things are going again. It is coming a little bit full circle.
The same.
And so, like, just here in the UK, like, I'm a big fan of the work of guys like Fraser Davidson, who does a lot of sports, motion graphics as well, and sheer output of his work and is just incredible. And then, you know, going back to, you know, sort of the classics of design in general, and so, like, you know, your Dieter Rams, your is it Ertul Eicher, who designed the Olympic pictograms, and you know, very simple iconic systems that, you know, I think the key for a lot of these guys, and it will be the same, you know, with Johnny Ive at Apple, is making something not necessarily complex, but it's a complex process to get to something that is very simple in the end. I really admire that approach, is that it's not just simple, but you can tell that a lot of work has gone into making it that way. So that's the sort of thing that inspires me, and that I hope to try and emulate, I suppose.
Last question. What do you think that is the next big thing in design? Or maybe digital design in general, if you are talking about mobile phones and other stuff, technology, new technology.
Yeah,
so what do you think that it's...
I honestly wish I knew, because that's where I feel like my career would go. I kind of jump on when I see the next big thing, I'd want to be a part of it. So at the time, it was Flash and then the web. So I went towards that, and then it was mobile, and so I went in that direction. And so honestly, I don't really know. I think.
So your guess?
Well, my guess would be that it won't be virtual reality. I've had some experience with that, and I think at this stage it's too cumbersome. It's a long way off being the next big thing. It may just be the next small thing. Augmented reality is possibly something where it's going, and maybe a lot of this stuff would be putting UI designers out of work, but interfaces that rely less on touch and perhaps more on other sensors, or even just thinking. So, as they say, the best interface is no interface. So that's my weak prediction for the future.
Great. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, great. Thanks.
Thank you.